Hello again, it's Aidan from Brainbug and back with another tutorial for you. Not a full tutorial series this time. This is kind of a self-contained, quite fast, quite quick, and hopefully useful. We're going to cover compositing and VFX within Blender and EEVEE, and hopefully we're going to get you to do some new stuff quite simply. We're going to cover some core concepts, so nothing too complex, but just enough hopefully to kind of start inspiring you, get you thinking about new approaches and all the cool stuff you'll be able to do in your own animations. This will be very quick and dirty, relatively. I think there's deep dives you could do on a lot of these topics. What we're trying to do is get a quick overview, so some of it might be a bit hacky. Don't worry about it, just have fun. We're going to timestamp, hopefully, all the sections within the tutorial, so you should be able to just jump ahead and focus on the bits that kind of appeal to you the most. So don't hang around, just get stuck in where you fancy and just try and roll your sleeves up and have fun with that. At the very end of the lesson, we're going to have a quick section on just taking your Blender animation and getting that out into something like a video editor and adding some simple effects and rendering off an animation. It's going to be very, again, quick and light, but hopefully straightforward and easy to follow along. So please do, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the tutorial. Hi, it's Aidan from Brainbug here again. We've got a small tutorial here. It's not a full course, but it's something hopefully you'll find interesting. We've been using a little bit of the Compositor recently, and I kind of came across a few little tips and techniques that I thought might be useful and interesting to people. So we're going to kind of throw things together, see what sticks, and hopefully you'll find something useful in there. To kind of explain what's going on, we've been working on an internal IP. This is a bit of a sneak preview of part of it, at least. We're going to be having these kind of bespoke design sci-fi, let's call them ships, as part of this world that we're developing, and there'll be more on that as we go. So follow Brainbug to keep up to date. And we wanted to do a kind of decayed video, almost like broken transmission effect with a render describing this. So if I bring up a video over here that we've made, this is kind of where we ended up with this. This kind of lo-fi CRT technology display showing kind of the stats of this this particular bit of equipment. So we were like experimenting with a few different things in Blender, and I came across some stuff that I thought would be interesting. Mainly using the Compositor, which I think I've mentioned in a previous tutorial that we've not used too heavily. So we've been using the Compositor a little bit, but in this one we kind of wanted to go a little bit deeper. Most of the compositing and VFX tutorials I saw seem to cover things from the cycles point of view, which is great, but can be very slow and not super fast if you want to get things out quickly. So we were kind of experimenting with ways to do this in EEVEE and keep it quick and fast. So in this tutorial, we're going to show you how to use EEVEE to do just that. I'll jump ahead here. I'll show you the kind of end scene, hopefully, where we can look at what we're going to end up with. So if I, you can see we've got a bit of a compositing workflow going on here in the windows over here. We've got our rendered view up here, and then our final rendered image is going to have a few little extras that you can see here, which will explain in the following minutes. I don't know how long this will be. Hopefully not too long. We're going to try and get through this relatively quick for you. So this is kind of where we're going to end up. This is going to be an animation as well, which we'll play for you soon. But this is going to be what we're aiming for. And again, this is more about the ideas as opposed to fully fledged, final VFX. But there's hopefully some nice little things in here that you'll enjoy. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. So the first part of this will be discussing what's going on up here. If you see me highlighting up here, these are areas that you might not have explored very much before. We've got our little menu up here. If you click that down, I've got a few things set up, and here as well. This is our kind of scene collections, and these are view layers. We're going to be mainly focusing on the scenes because there's some quirks with the view layers I've noticed with this. So for a kind of like surefire brute force solution, we're just going to stick with the scenes, and I'll just talk you through what these are and how they work quickly, so you get an overview of yourself and you can kind of understand what we're doing. So for example, we're eventually going to have this as a composited render showing kind of maybe the interior workings and some kind of cool effects like a wireframe overlay. So the first thing we need obviously is just our standard scene with our model in it, which is what we have here. We've set up a couple of lights over here. Nothing fancy whatsoever. This is pretty basic. For our compositing workflow though, we're going to want to set up a few different versions of this scene. Again, I'll show you quickly what that looks like in the compositor over here. If I kind of skip through these scenes here, you'll see how they're slightly different, and we're going to get different results out of them and then add them all together to create our final render, which is going to look like this. So going back to our main scene, this is going to be our starting point for everything we do from now on. So there's nothing magical set up here. We've just got a beautiful model made by one of the team here at Brainbug, Rick. He's Rockets on Instagram if you want to follow him. It's a really nice bit of design. He's concepted this out. He's built this block out. And we're going to be using this now for the rest of our demo. So going in here, we have our scene. We're going to make a new scene with this. I'll show you how we can make things different and how we can start like creating these layers almost that we'll use in the compositor. So in this menu over here, we're going to go to the new scene. I'm going to click this one, which is a full copy, which is going to basically make a copy of this entire scene, which you'll see now. Let's just call this scene tutorial demo or something. And if I click through here, we can kind of see this is where I started. This is our kind of starting point. And this is the new one I've just made. To all intents and purposes, it's identical. There are some other options in here. This is probably more of a full tutorial in its own right, but for now, we're just going to stick with the full copy because that allows us to kind of do what you want with this. So for example, I can delete this entire hierarchy. And if I go back to the scene base, you can still see it's there. It still exists. So we can kind of copy the whole scene and then modify it and delete things as we need. So for example, I could delete anything else here and it won't affect anything in any of these other scenes. There's ways of doing it so they're linked and you can kind of see changes reflected through the whole thing. Bit complicated. As I said, we're just going to brute force through this and just get the results we need as quick as possible. So we've got this new scene. My idea for this tutorial and this compositing was I wanted kind of some sort of overlay showing the inner workings of this this ship. So kind of like where it's like engines might be or the heat sources, like a heat map. So I'm going to make a new group or collection as we call it. And let's just call this tutorial. And we're just going to make some stuff. I'm going to hide the yacht in a second, but for now we've got this tutorial group selected. I'm going to add like just add a cylinder. There we go. That's now in our scene. I'll scale up so we can see it. I'm going to rotate that on its side here. And we can just put this anywhere. And let's imagine this is kind of like the engine block at the core of the boat. It's kind of like a generator or nuclear power plant or something that they've got in here that provides the acceleration needed in this this sci-fi universe. So I'm just going to add a few quick details. I'm going to extrude that out. This is literally going to be for demo purposes. I'm not modeling anything particularly interesting or fancy here. Let's grab some of these. Scale that down and just give let's maybe give it a little turbine inlet up here. I'm going to maybe isolate this so we can see what I'm doing a little better. Okay, and extrude that in, scale it, and same on the back maybe. I'm just pressing I to do inset there, E to extrude in. I'll scale that down again. I'm going to extrude that out one more time. And that's our kind of dummy giant engine model. I'm going to click on Auto Smooth, which will be slightly different in Blender 4.2 maybe, but something like that will be fine for now. Don't worry about it too much. Now I want to give this a material. I'm just going to call this tutorial engine or something. And I'm going to make this an emissive material because we're going to use that quality to make it kind of look like it's glowing when we're adding it to the other renders. So I'm going to give it let's give it a unique color. maybe a green. I don't think we've got anything green yet. And I'm going to set the base color to match that by just color sampling, hopefully. Click, come on, click where I need you to. There we go. So that's our object, and I'll turn on the other boat now. You can kind of see where that lives. So that's kind of embedded in there. So we wouldn't normally be able to see this if we look in our render view, but with the compositing workflow, we're going to be able to superimpose this as if it's kind of like a digital overlay. So I'll show you how that might happen. So we're going to set that up next. So the next thing I want to quickly look at is maybe the kind of wireframe voxelized effects that we can see if I bring up this video here. There we go. So this has a kind of a wireframe overlay that we've superimposed on the base geometry. So how do you render out a wireframe? This was trickier than I thought it would be, actually. I did a lot of Googling, a lot of tutorials, and it took me a bit of a while to figure out how to do this in EEVEE. There's quite a few ways of doing it in cycles, I believe. And there's some hacks like using the viewport display and the workbench render options, but I didn't want to use those. So I had to figure out some other way of doing it. So we'll talk you through that. And the first part of that is let's duplicate our scene again. Give it a second, and let's name this as our tutorial wireframe or something. Naming things will help us down the line. So if you keep it sensible, it'll make more sense later on. So let's just rename that so everything's lined up. Yeah, there we go. So this is our new scene we've just created. Again, I'm just going to delete this stuff we don't need. There's probably a few other things in there we don't need, but right now what I do need is the yacht itself. And we're going to use a modifier to kind of change our geometry to give us a sort of Minecrafty blocky effect, which will help with our wireframe kind of look that I want. This is the Remesh modifier. Some really handy options here. I really love to revoxelize things. It can give you some really interesting abstract shapes. So this could be a good look. I'm not going to use this one right now. I'm going to go for the block setting actually, which, as you can see, is gone a bit too extreme. So let's increase the resolution here. You might want to be careful with anything in this menu, like the voxels and the blocks. If you go too high in any of these, you might start hearing your computer like dying. My fans in the background have already started whirring. So you got to be careful, but within reason, you shouldn't blow up your PC too badly. So this is our blocky voxelized boat, which again, if I turn this on and off again, you can see how that's affecting the geometry. But it's not what we want exactly. We want this to look like a wireframe overlay. So how do we do that? The answer is shaders, and particularly EEVEE shader, which turned out to be a bit trickier to solve than I thought, because there's a lot of like wireframe hacks and workarounds and versions for cycles, but something that works just in EEVEE that we can render out quickly and easily seemed to be a bit tricky. I think I've got something that works, so I'll talk you through what that is next, and we can show you how to do that. Okay, now to talk a little bit about shaders. This is going to be a relatively brief overview. So again, there's some of this maybe we could go into a deeper dive at some point, but right now we're just going to focus on the basics and getting things looking good quickly. So we're just going to make a sphere to demonstrate what we're going to be doing here, and I'm going to give this a new material, and we're just going to call this like VFX test. Whatever you want it to be is fine. I'm going to give it a sci-fi color. The most sci-fi colors we know is kind of like this tealy, bluey green. There you go, instantly sci-fi. Let's go into our shader editor next and kind of tweak this to give us something that does actually look a little bit more science fiction. So right now, nothing special here. We're going to do a few quick things to add that special factor that we're looking for. One of which is add a mix shader. So I've just pressed Shift A to look for this. So I'm going to do look mix, and not mix color in this case. It's going to be mix shader, because we're going to be mixing this BSDF. I'm going to plug that in here. And what we're going to do now is going to add an emission shader, which is here. And again, we're going to pick maybe that sci-fi color. If I just plug this back in here for a second. Let's pick this color again. keep it science fiction. And then if you look in here, so we've got our mix shader, we're feeding in the BDSF in there, and we're going to feed in this one here. So this is going to be our glowy bit eventually, because this is an emission shader. So this will be our glowy sci-fi factor. At the moment, you're not seeing it do very much. To show the difference, I'll make this quite dark. And as we blend between these two things by changing the factor here. So that is showing just this shader. If I set this to 0, it's just this shader plugging in. This isn't being affected. The more I slide this over, the more this emission shader is. So at this case, it's just this emission shader at 100%. That's halfway between the two. But we want to blend it in a way that looks a bit more science fiction-y. And the way to do that is good old. Let's add this. Search for Fresnel or Fresnel. I'm not sure 100% on the pronunciation. We're going to plug that in here. And you should see something interesting happen pretty quickly. I'm going to make the strength of this 2 on the emission so you can kind of see that kicking off a bit more. And to accent it even more, I'm going to turn off some of these things here. And I'm going to make that shade smooth. And hopefully you can kind of see now what's happening. If I render view this, we've got this shader sticking to the edges almost. This glow effect is adding just that effect on the edges. That's what Fresnel does. It kind of picks things towards the edges. You'll see how it works if I apply it to stuff like this as well. In fact, I can just link it. I'll just do Control-L, link materials. And there you go. You can kind of see what's happening. We've got this effect, almost like an X-ray or something scientific or, computer-esque. We bring in our classic Suzanne. We should see what she looks like as well. I'm going to smooth her off. Link that material. There we go. And again, let's smooth it so we can see that effect better. So hopefully you can kind of see, the beginnings of what we're going to do with the shader. So this on its own is useful. We might use this in some other situations later on. But for now, this is kind of the first port of call. This is the first thing we're going to do to it, but it's not the only thing we're going to do to it. So next is adding a kind of wireframe effect to this as well. So we're going to show how to do wireframe, and that'll be our next step. So we're ready to take our monkey volunteer into the next Tron dimension. The way we're going to do that is very similar to what we've done here. We're literally just going to copy these. I'll select these a bit bigger and paste them. There we go. So I'm copying and pasting those. And we're going to kind of do a similar thing. We're just going to daisy chain this effect essentially. So I'm going to unplug here and start plugging things into this as well. So from this mix shader, we're going to plug that into our mix shader here. We're also going to do this here. So we're just doing the kind of very similar setup to what we had here. I'll make this full screen so you can kind of see what's going on. Then we're going to add in, again, Shift A to search, and we're going to look for the wireframe node, which I didn't even know was a thing until quite recently. So pardon my ignorance, but it's very useful. So this is how we've plugged things in. And let's kind of go back and see what's happening. I need to plug that in there. Right. Now we have our wireframe and monkey overlay combined. So you can see as well, like there's, it's got the Fresnel fall off. I'll make this slightly more exaggerated. We're making this completely black. I'm going to make the emission on this really strong. And you can see it's got that edge fall off. It's getting dark towards the sides. And now we have this wireframe overlay on top. One thing I'm not a super fan of this is you can't seem to do like a quad-based wireframe. It triangulates the wireframes, which I'm not always a massive fan of. I do like a nice quad mesh if we can see it. But this will do for now. This is a good effect. And we can adjust the intensity of the wireframe through this slider here. And it's quite easy to go overboard, so you don't want to go too high. So leaving it just the default should be fine in this case. So after this little detour, now hopefully you can kind of see what we can do with this technique. And now we're going to go back and apply it to the yacht boat model. And we're going to use that as part of our rendering pipeline. So that's done for Monkey World, Monkey Tron. It's time for boats. Let's go back to boats. And here we are back in Boat Town. It's going to get a little bit more interesting than just this gray Lego looking thing. So here's a material I prepared earlier. Let's find where that is. If I search for it in my wireframe, there it is. And hopefully, if I preview that, there we go. So that's how we are using that technique in this scene. And now we have this kind of Lego looking boat wireframe. So what we're going to do with it? Well, now that we've got actually a few different scenes, let's have a look at what we got. We've got our, as we've said before, our base scene, which is just this. It's just our boat. This is going to be our render base. Then we're going to have some sort of engine-y thing overlaid onto this. This is going to be an overlay of this engine component. And then finally, we're going to have this wireframe. So these are the three main building blocks of our final effect. So really the next step is showing you how to kind of combine those all in one render and how easy that is to do with EEVEE and the Compositor. So it's time to maybe take a break and a breather from all our hard work. Get up, stretch your legs, enjoy some, sunshine. Maybe not today. It's not quite so sunny here as the last time I've been around. But whatever you need to do, grab a cup of tea. I know I have. So whatever it is you need to do to kind of just like get the blood flowing, take a break. While you're doing that, if we could ask you to subscribe to the channel, press the like button. I'm not going to say mash, but press it, whatever it is you need to do, and just stay tuned to what we're up to. And we'd love to see you back here. So stay alerted, and hopefully we'll have you back for more later on. In the meantime, I think we've got some more tutorial to get back to. So as soon as you're ready, get yourself prepared and we'll dive right back in. So this is the place where we're going to do the final touches and make the magic happen. So we'll talk you through a little bit what's going to happen next and how our next steps are going to look. So we're in the Compositor here. I've got my compositing window open. There's a couple of quick things to check at the moment. I'm going to go down into my render options here. Just to be clear, it's this section on your render settings, and down here I've got film, and I'm going to click that to transparent. So this is important for some stuff that happens further down the line. So in this case, we want this on. There are scenes where you might not need that, so that's fine. But here I do want this, so I'm going to leave that on, and it's going to maybe help some things be a little simpler down the line. We have our compositor over here. By default, this isn't enabled. We've got this use nodes button. Do make sure this is clicked. I was doing this the other night and I did not have that clicked, and I spent 10 minutes trying to figure out why nothing was working. And it was just, for some reason, when you go into the compositor, that's not enabled by default. Slightly strange decision to me, but maybe there's a very good reason for it. I just don't know what that could be. So here we are. We've got our render basic setup, and we're going to set up our compositor layout like this. This is my 3D view here. We've got set to rendered mode, and down here I've got like the image viewer, image editor, and I want that set to render results. So I'm going to click on, if it isn't set to that, you just kind of search for it in here. I can spell render result. So that's going to show us when we click the render button what our final composited image looks like. It's important to notice that the compositor, all the effects won't show up in your 3D viewport. It has to be rendered properly like this for everything to kind of come through. At the moment, not a lot's coming through because we've just got this set up. This is our render scene at the moment. Nothing too impressive. So what we have is we've made these scenes like the engine, and we've made the wireframe. So we're going to use these, and per scene as well. I need to make sure those transparencies are set. We need these new scenes that we've made to composite in on top of what we're doing here. So we'll show you how to do that and what the steps are. And as I said, this render result will show you the final look, but only if you click on the render image or render animation button. It won't work for the 3D viewport. The 3D viewport, even if it's set to rendered mode, is never going to show you the final results. So bear that in mind. Don't get discouraged if things don't look the way you think they should. Just render and you'll see the final look of things. So let's go quickly through our two new scenes. We have our the engine. I want to hide everything except the engine block. So I'm going to hide this. What turns up in your render is very much dependent on some of the settings here. Like one of the most reliable ways I've found to make things not show up is just to enable this, if it's not already enabled. Go up to your filters here, turn on this exclude from view layer button, and just toggle that off. It kind of just seems to like disable everything completely, which seems to be the most reliable way I've found recently. There are other reasons you would use these ones, but right now, I said it's just brute force. I just want to see this. I could even delete everything else in these scenes because, again, these scenes are all independent from each other. So right now, that seems to be okay. So I'm going to leave all those settings there. That's what we want out of this render group. And in this section here, similar, it's kind of more or less set up. That's fine. We just want to see this voxel wireframe effect. So going back to our base scene, this is what we got. We're just rendering from this base into our final render. First thing we're going to do is add in our engine scene. So I'm going to copy this render layer and just paste it. And then we're going to talk about how to use these scenes that we set up already. So here, I'm going to zoom in so we can see everything. Here's where we actually select the scene that we want to render out of this render layer. From here, what I want to do is it's kind of like Photoshop. This is going to be a layer that sits on top of this. Unfortunately, we don't have like a layer stack like in Photoshop, so we have to kind of manually tell Blender to stick things on top of each other. So we're going to do that with a screen layer, which again, like Photoshop, and we're going to do that through the mix. I hope it's this one. Yes, it is this one. So we just search for the mix. Again, I'm just doing Shift A, searching, type in mix, and I'll bring you up the thing you need. And we're going to be seeing these a lot, so get ready. There's more where these came from. So this is going to be the kind of basic process for this image. We're going to disconnect our image from here and plug it into that. If you're wondering what I'm doing here, I'm pressing Control and right click. You need to have your Node Wrangler add-on enabled for that to work, but that will cut a connection. So I'm just doing Control and right click and dragging to do this. And that's very handy. So recommend, it's a built-in default add-on. So just do that. And you'll be able to kind of disconnect and connect it to your heart's content. So this is going to be our base layer. In the Compositor, this top slot is kind of the bottom of your image if you're in Photoshop. And this is the thing that is sitting on top of it, even though it's like back to front. So think of this as your base. And this slot here is where we're going to overlay on top of this. So this image here, we're going to plug in. And again, nothing happens at the moment. So now I've connected those up. Again, I just need to make sure that this was connected to my composite. And that's the kind of the final end result. So we always want something going in there. I didn't have that connected a second ago. So just added that. So now we have our chain. So it's basically our base image. We're going to this mix shader. We're adding this green engine on top. And then we're feeding those both through that kind of combined image into the final render. You can see it here. It looks not great. So why is that? So the reason is because the way we're mixing these images. So if we look at this factor again, so at 0, all it's saying is that this image is basically the only image that it's looking at. So you can see that here. It's 100% this image with nothing of this. If I slide that over to 1 there, then it's the other way around. It's just rendering this fully and it's not rendering that properly. So we need to combine them better. So like I said, this kind of green element, I want that as an overlay, like a glowing predator vision heat map. The best way to do that maybe in this case is like a screen mode. And instantly you can see we've got this overlay of this kind of effect on top. So if I play the animation from the top view, we've just got this rotating, you'll see it doesn't update in the render result because this isn't live. This is only showing your render. But if I render that now, so that's now lined up perfectly. So what can we do with this though? So again, maybe we don't want it quite so intense, or we want like a kind of glow effect. We could do that as well. But either way, we could just blend it back from here. So like if we wanted to dial the intensity back, you can see here, the more I increase that, the stronger that effect is in this case. So from nothing down here all the way up to like full on. But again, it's a bit hard edge. We could do some more stuff with this. We can duplicate this effect. And let's try something a bit more complicated now. We're going to copy, paste. Okay. This could go a bit wrong. Bear with me. Might need this. So we've just copied our green glowy object effect. I would like it to have a bit of a Gaussian blur, or like kind of look like a bit blurry, a little softer, a bit more like a glowing object. So we can do that in the compositor. All we need to do is grab this again, and then I'm going to do Shift A, search again. I'm going to look for blur, and that brings us this nice blur dialog. So if I just drag this over here, there we go. That's connected up automatically. I'm going to move things around. Things are going to get slightly cramped if we're not careful. So now I've got this going in here. I've got Gaussian blur set. I'm just going to dial in a number here, and we're going to see how this looks. Right now, we're not going to see any of this because we need to connect it all up. So let's look at our connections. Yes, I'm going to need another connection in here. And then this goes out here. Ta-da! You can see that here, hopefully. So by just changing the value of this blur amount, we can get a softer or harder glow effect. So I'm going to leave that maybe like 15 or something. It's quite nice. And just to kind of talk you through this kind of chain again, I'll make this a bit bigger. So we have our base render. We've added in the engine glow, or the glow of the engine on top of it using the screen mode. Then we duplicate this again, we blur it, and then we just overlay that on the previous combined image. So we're just going to chain together these layers so that we can kind of build up a more complicated image. So hopefully that makes sense. At this stage, it's just repeating this similar process. Think of it like Photoshop layers. Think about adding layers on layers on layers and duplicating layers to kind of change the effect slightly. So now we have this kind of glow effect. I might want to make the kind of base object a little less strong though. Let's dial that one down. There we go. That's getting a bit fainter. You can see that dialing up and down there. So at least that is in real time. You don't have to re-render to kind of see the effects as I'm dragging that across. So maybe something like that. So that's our kind of engine overlay. I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to save my file before I make any terrible mistakes. So now we're going to look at our next kind of effect in this chain, which is, if you remember, the voxel kind of wireframe. So again, I'm just going to copy our base render layer. We're just going to reuse this again. And I'm going to copy it down here. This is going to be our next chain. So if we zoom in on this, let's change what we want that to be. So this is our wireframe. That's turned up now. Okay, it just needed to kind of refresh somehow. Jumping in and out of the scene seems to have done that. I don't know why. Let's just be happy it works. So this is the next thing we're going to do. So if you can imagine how this would work, let's guess. So we're going to need another mix shader. So let's just find that again just for practice. Let's find our mix. So as before, we want the output of where we were before. We want the final stage of that chain, and that's going to be the base of our new mix. So we're just taking what we've done before, and that's our base, and now we're going to add on this new effect. So now we just take the output of that, and again make sure we're connecting up to the final link in the chain. Don't forget about that. So again, we're on the right tracks. This is showing up. And that's looking pretty good. But it's not perfect yet though, because as you can see, the blending mode is leaving this black underlay, which we don't want. We want this to look like it's sitting on top of it. So how we do that again, same as before, we just change this to some sort of like blending mode. We could do any sort of blending mode here. We could do this as like color dodge. Let's zoom in here and just see what that's doing. We could do it as a add, as always, kind of fun. Bit more intense, and a screen is kind of very similar. maybe just a little less intense. So what do I want? Let's leave it as a screen. Let's stick with screen for now. But again, feels very kind of blown out. So I want that a little bit more subtle. So I'm just going to bring that down here and dial that back so it's just more of a subtle overlay. And one thing I'm noticing as well is like I feel like it's quite intense in terms of the detail. So let's save our file and we're just going to jump back to our wireframe scene. We can change everything while this is happening, which is a great, that's why using the compositor is so good. Everything is still kind of editable and will show up in the final result. So I want this to look a bit more blocky. So let's decrease the resolution actually. So I'm just going to knock that down one, or even more. That's probably too far. Let's stick with 6 and go back to our compositor and make sure we're in the right scene. Let's go back to our scene base, which is kind of where we're assembling everything. And if I re-render that, you can see now that updated. It's now less blocky. It's a little less in your face. And again, we can just bring down the intensity of that a little bit. So it's just a little bit subtle. But that's not all. That's not the end of it. We're going to do the same thing we did again. So this is where we're at. We want to add that kind of subtle glow effect to this though. So same steps again. We're just going to duplicate this. We're going to duplicate this mix layer. I'm going to disconnect this. And we just repeat that process. So again, this is a thing we're going to want to overlay on top of our previous image. So let's bring in our previous image as far as we got. Let's connect this up so we can see everything, which is super important. And then let's connect this. This isn't going to be doing very much yet because now we want to add our blur node. And again, there's different types of blur in here. We're going to stick with just the defaults, and I'm just going to click that dial. So let's ramp up the intensity. There you go. You can see now that blur kicking in. How strong do you want it though? How strong do you want this blur? Entirely up to yourselves. I might just go quite wild with it for a second and then we can tune it back from there. So quite blurry. And let's go and dial this back to something a bit like that. So now we have our wireframe overlaid. It's glowing. If we rotate this around, let's re-render our animation. Everything is now working perfectly, if I do say so myself. Perfectly. And hopefully it's working perfectly for you as well. So we have this kind of effect now where all these components are now being added on top of each other in real time, more or less, in Blender. And that's our chain here. So feel free to kind of have a closer look at that if you need to. But as I said, it's just kind of very simple. You overlaying things with this kind of simple step-by-step approach, and hopefully you won't get too lost. And think of ways you could add in other bits or other effects. Or for example, I could take this engine block, do another version of it with that wireframe. So you could then add that wireframe back in on top of it. There's no end to the kind of amount of variations you can do with this. This is just a start in terms of getting to think in this technique. And it's quite new to myself as well. So I'm also now thinking different ways I can use this approach, and particularly keeping it in EEVEE as much as possible so that we're not dealing with like cycles, render times, which can be, as we know, very long indeed. Whereas this is rendering out really fast and is looking good. So we're kind of at the end point of where we're at in Blender almost. So maybe the next thing we'll do is just add a few little final touches using some of the compositor nodes in Blender, and that'll be the kind of end of our Blender journey, but we might have a little bit more extra after that in some video software. So here we are, and we've got a few little steps left to do, and then we're going to call it a day in the compositor, and kind of hopefully that kind of overview we have of everything so far. So let's quickly do a search by doing Shift A. I'm going to add is it distortion? Distort? Lens distortion. It's a classic. I love a bit of it. I can be a bit guilty of going too far with this, but again, for the purpose of a tutorial and things looking cool quite quickly, why not? So you can see here, it's going to give us this kind of chromatic aberration, as they call it, effect. Hopefully that's clear. Let's kind of play through this and maybe get a different view. So yes, you can see now it's adding this kind of like smudgy screen rainbow effect, which again, massively overplayed. I do it too often in these sort of things. I can't help myself, and I will stop one day, but today is not that day. I've talked about how there's a few little things you can do with the compositor at this stage. That's one of them. Another thing you can do is glare, which is adds more glows. I don't know if we need it in this one, but if you did want to throw it in, you might set it to glow, for example. Let's see what that looks like. This threshold value is basically like, when does this glow kick in? The lower the value it is, you'll see it starts getting glowier the lower that is. So that can blow things out quite quickly, quite easily. If you want this effect, great. I don't know if I need this right now or if I need it this strong. Sometimes it can be a bit out of control. That's not too bad. We could say that's okay if we want to, and carry on with our lives. And then finally, let us maybe do a little color adjustment. So there's a few different ones you can do here. Let's look at color balance. So again, we just drop that in here and plug it in. I think we want, there's a few different options. Let's just stick in here for now. This is basically like shadows, midtones, and highlights. So we could make the shadows like purple and the highlights green, or any combination of this that you so desire. So it's very flexible, very powerful for grading your footage. I don't want to go too far with this right now, but you can see there's some potential there for some interesting looks. I think towards the center is less saturated, towards the outside it's more saturated. So use carefully. It can get crazy pretty quickly. But if you wanted to, this is a nice little way to kind of unify your footage, make it have a distinct kind of color grade. That's looking quite cool and like cold, which I quite like. Taking a bit of the green out. There's a lot in this, so feel free to mess around with it to your heart's content. But that's it, and I think we're kind of more or less done from this point onwards. All you need to do now is render your animation, and you will hopefully get something that looks a little bit like, if I can just find where it is. Where is my video? It's playing in the VLC window. There it is. So that's stage one. Stage two is maybe taking this into something afterwards for some little post effects. So I'll quickly go into that next, and we'll show you a few little tips and techniques for that as well. So here we are. We're in the world of Capcut now, which is going to be a brief detour. I'm not going to go through absolutely everything, but you can kind of see some of what we've been doing in here to kind of give it this kind of like distorted, lo-fi, low-tech, retro computing feel. Capcut is free, at least the version I'm using is. It's the PC edition. There's, I think, similar features on the iPhone version. I'm not 100% sure. So for now, all I'm saying is this is what you'll be able to do in the PC version, the desktop version. Your mileage might vary on the other ones. It's also a bit of a strange bit of software. Like there's obviously Capcut and TikTok are the same company, and there's some privacy worries about this. I've looked into it myself a little bit. People said the PC version seems not to be doing anything too dodgy in terms of sending back mysterious data. So fingers crossed that is not the case. I'm sure that they would like to, so keep your eye on it. But for now, it does have a suite of really good out-of-the-box free look development tools and grades and animations and effects, which you won't find in DaVinci Resolve or other equivalent software. So for now, this is definitely worth playing around with. There's other software out there, obviously, and DaVinci is definitely much more suited to doing full-length videos and longer projects, but this is ideal for kind of quick effects. It's kind of like a budget / free After Effects in a way. You don't have super like huge amounts of control, but it can give you some quick effects that look nice without too much of a headache. So let's have a quick look at some of that, and I'll just talk you through what we're doing here and how you can do something similar. So we've dropped our render into our project in Capcut. And again, I'm just going to drop that onto the timeline here. So I've dropped a few, depending on how many you want, kind of like how much of a repeat or a loop you want on this. It's up to you. I've brought in a few copies here, so that will loop away and do its thing. And so far, so good. So with this, I'm going to delete these other copies right now because I'm going to do a few things to this first clip, and then we'll duplicate it. So I'm going to add I've got some layers already on here. I'm going to turn these off. So this is just our basic render. And from here, we're going to just do a few quick adjustments. So in our video up here, I'm going to scale it in a little bit. I just want like a bit of a zoomed in view for this one. So absolutely fine not to do this. This is just kind of for testing purposes. And I'm going to pull it down a little bit. So I'm going to select it and just move that down. And then as I play that animation, I kind of want to keep this cockpit area more or less in frame all the time. So looking good. Oh, that's gone off there. Let's even zoom that in and down again a bit more. Just for drama, we want to see the full effect of this. So that's our boat, and it's disappeared off the timeline. We're going to go into the adjustments tab here, and I'm just going to do some quick tints. So let's just tint that a little bit. There we go. Get that green in, or whatever it is you want to do. Maybe increase the saturation just a bit. Why not? Why not? Let's just do it. So that's a quick color adjustment. I'm going to add a couple of very simple effects on here as well. So those will be kind of simple and basic, but we're going to get a bit of mileage out of them. So I've got some favorites here already. I've got one called 90. These are all free as well. There's like paid effects that you will have to upgrade to, but these ones are all from the free version, except these two. I favorite them because one day you never know, I might pay for this, but right now, all of these ones here are free. So these are the ones we're going to be using. It can be tricky to find out sometimes what effects are applied to your thingy. So just to be clear, I'm going to drag that on. You can see it turning up here. If I deselect the effect thing, you'll see it's disappeared. Like, where do I find that effect? It lives up here in this little tab here, and that's how you can edit those settings again if you ever want to go near it again. So you can see it's doing more of this kind of like crazy chromatic aberration, but there's also a bit of a blur effect as well. It's kind of like doing a zoom, maybe a bit too much. So let's like dial that back and set that a little bit less aggressively, but some of it's not too bad. And another one I want to add in there is this 90s effect that I have. So again, just drag and drop onto the clip, and we have all the editing options here. Now you can see it's kind of degraded it a little bit. I might pull that back a little bit, and again, I'll clip back on my main clip, and you can see those clips now live here. If they disappear, just tap that arrow and you'll see them. And you're able to edit them there by hovering over these editing option buttons there. Again, sometimes quite difficult to see. So, don't worry if you can't find it. They are there. So that's kind of the basics of that. I'm going to select our clip now that we've done a few things to it. I'm going to copy and paste it. I'm going to get a couple of loops out of this. So for demonstration purposes, there we go. Looking good, looking good. So that's not the end of it though. We want more. I'll just scroll up through and just show you some of the other things I've added. So I've added this adjustment layer, which is just going to again, tint some of the values and colors. So we're kind of changing things subtly and getting what's kind of more of this kind of old computer display feel. And from there, because you can drop an effect onto a layer, not just onto a clip. So I can drop anything here and make it onto an entire new layer. So everything under that layer will have that effect, which is really nice. It's really cool. So you can have an effect that applies to as many clips underneath it as you want. So all I've done here is add a few clips and effects on layers, and you'll see this building up. Again, I've got a few favorites here. I've got the 90s. I've got one called Glitch. Again, it's really easy to find these. You just type in, if you were looking for yourself, just type in Glitch. and you will hopefully find, there you go, there's the glitch one. You can see it's free. It doesn't have a pro label in there. And again, you can just drag that onto a layer or do whatever you want with it. So that's now added to a layer. And you can resize it so that it only affects a bit of the timeline or the full timeline. Really, really nice. So this one adds these kind of like scan lines. If I turn it off, it's also adding a bit of like wobble. Like if I can show, does that show up? Yes, you'll notice the edges start to wobble as it's rotating. Like a bit of like analog wobbliness. You're adjust to your taste. If you want it like super wobbly, go for it. Get as much wobble in there as you like. So let's leave that. We've got more coming in. Got some like this kind of TV colored lines. Again, just search for any of these things in your effects panel and you'll find them there quite easily. Don't think there's any settings for this one. It just kind of is on or off. It gives you this kind of like banding. I don't know if you can see that. If I can kind of find somewhere here. You can see this banding here, kind of like, again, like an old broken telly. If you remember from before LCD times, like I do. I've got a bit of that chrome blur on there again. I think it's just set very subtly. This digital video texture, a DV texture, again, adds some noise. Again, it can get quite intense, so I don't want that too much. And this kind of like, this banding that you used to get on like older displays, which I quite like. So that makes it, again, look more like a CRT TV and not an LCD panel. And then finally, I threw on a vignette, which is, again, just, it darkens the corners of the image, like, you know, it fades out towards here again on older tech. Maybe that's a kind of an old screen. It's not its usual standards, when it was bought new, and you get this kind of fading out towards the edges. So they're the kind of steps to take our kind of base render and start adding this kind of retro looking feel to it, and we can start, you know, building up our look and our effects as much as we want. And that's kind of it. We're pretty much at the end there, and I hope that kind of helps you and inspires you to try some of this for yourself, whether that's the Blender Compositor and then taking the results into something like this and seeing what you can do. While I'm here, I'll show you one of the other versions of this we did, which I can hopefully find. And you can see here a version of this we did for Instagram, like a kind of vertical format, obviously. So same principles, same techniques. We've added some like kind of cool retro type and a few little bits and bobs there. A little monster visible there if you were looking closely. And that's it really. I hope that was all very useful. It was great having everyone along for another tutorial. There will be more if people want them. Let us know what you think. And this is the end of the tutorial. And that's it. We've reached the end. We hope you've had a good time. I hope it wasn't too painful. I think we covered a lot of ground, so don't worry if it didn't all quite sink in 100% just yet. There's lots to go through. There's probably more we could do on individual topics within this whole tutorial, so let us know if there was anything you thought we could go a little bit deeper on for next time. Apart from that, we're going to wrap things up. Please follow us on our Instagram. Check all our links in our description. We have courses available, so you'll find details of that in below as well. So wherever the links are, click on them and keep track of what we're up to, and we'll hopefully be seeing more of you soon. So until then, thanks a lot and goodbye from everyone here at Brainbug.